Today I want to talk about why you should foam roll and stretch when you exercise/train, but even if you don't work out, why it is wise and why it makes sense to foam roll and stretch. There is, before we start, one exception for people that are hypermobile that don't necessarily have to stretch. In some areas they might be tight. In many other areas they are very mobile. The tightness usually comes more from aspects of lack of stability, but we get back to that later on. But if you have hypermobile, you're double joint, you can stay away from stretching, generally speaking, and just focus on foam rolling, which will reduce the muscle tone. So let's start. Why do we actually foam roll and do tissue work? Foam roll is very often reducing the tone in the muscle, so it is a neurological aspect. When we foam roll, when we roll, get a massage or do tissue work, it sends a signal to our brain to release the muscle tone. So generally speaking, when we foam roll, it helps us to relax the muscle and lengthen the muscle. The muscle itself does not change, it's just the tension within the muscle. Now, stretching is a different aspect. Stretching actually helps us to elongate the muscle and also helps us with the fascial system, which we will get back to later on. So the sequence would be to foam roll first to reduce the muscle tension and then stretch after to actually lengthen the muscle. The stretching helps us, and the foam rolling, if we work with intense foam rolling or other tools, actually on the tissue itself. So it will help to realign the muscle tissue, to lengthen the muscle tissue. Why is it so important to foam roll and stretch? As we mentioned before, we lengthen the muscle tissue. If the muscle is tight and short, it will pull on the joints. So that can then lead to restriction in the movement, in the joint range of motion, which then also would over time lead to more problems. Very often the joint is not moving properly in that case anymore, and excessive wear in the joint will occur. A good example is the hip joint. When the hip flexor, the psoas, is tight, the humerus moves forward and grains down the hip joint, which then will decrease the length of the life of the joint itself. Be aware that when you stretch, your maximum performance is a little bit reduced, so 15 to 20 minutes. So if you, for example, want to do a maximum lift, if you do weightlifting, or you want to have maximum performance sprinting, you would have to wait or start early with your stretching, then do an active warm-up, so you're then prepared for the maximum lift / sprint. So what are reasons why muscles get tight? First one would be intense training. After an intense training, the body will react rebuilding the tissue, and usually the tension in the muscle will be increased. Second one, dehydration. If you dehydrate, the muscle will reduce in flexibility and also in the performance that you can create. Contracting the muscle will be decreased. Third one, muscle dysfunction. A good example are the hamstrings. Not almost always the hamstrings are actually tight. Some cases are completely different. So if your anterior core, the front of your core, is weak, your hips will sit forward, which then will increase the tension in your hamstrings. If this is excessive, the body will lay down trigger points to tighten up the hamstrings to maintain the hips in a better position. A good example also for weak muscle that will affect the tension in the muscle would be the lack of rotational stability in the core. Very often what I see is when you help a client, a person, to increase rotational stability, over time the body will increase the thoracic mobility. So meaning as the body realizes that there is more strength in the core to stabilize the spine, it will release more movement and rotation. The fifth reason why you might have tight muscles is mental stress. Our thought patterns, mental stress, will have a direct impact on our muscle tension. Best example are the neck muscles. When we are stressed, we don't realize that we are actually slightly pulling up our shoulders, which then over time leads to tight neck muscles, which then also can very often lead to migraines or tension headaches. And the last reason might be tight fascia in general. The fascial system runs through the whole body and gives the basically gloves around the muscles. They run through like spider webs through the whole body and help us to create movement, but also stay in their position. Without the fascial system, the muscle would not be able to transfer movement or contraction to the bones. So the extension of the fascial system are tendons, ligaments, and that are connected to the bones. But the fascial system has different layers and connects all the muscles and the bone structure together. So one more time, what are the reasons why we should foam roll and stretch? Lengthening the muscle, being able to reduce the tension on tendons, on bursars, which can lead to a bursitis, which also leads to bigger wear and tear on our joints. It is very important to be able to express full range of motions in all of our joints, because when we move, we need to be able to move properly. If the movement is restricted, we also will very often create muscle disbalances, and we will have more wear and tear on our joints, on our bones, etc. So if you want to prevent injury over time, it is essential to foam roll and stretch.